We finally have a minute to talk about something other than GPUs, and that's going to be a case. This is the LandCool 215 by Lian Li. It is a budget-oriented $70 airflow case, and as anything else that claims airflow in its marketing, we're going to be running this through our exhaustive suite for thermals, acoustics, noise, normalized thermals, and everything else. We have a couple hundred lines of case data now, and a lot of that in the last year or so has been airflow focused. This, however, is one of the cheapest of the airflow-focused cases that we've looked at anytime recently, and that's what makes it interesting. Before that, this video is brought to you by EK and the EK AIO series. We recently reviewed the EK AIO DRGB 360 as one of the top performers in our CPU cooler charts, advantaged from its fan performance and high-quality pump internals that we found during our teardown. If you're looking for a high-performance RGB CPU cooler with longer steady-state times, check out the EK AIO 360 and 240 at the links in the description below. So we first saw this case in secret back in March when we visited Taiwan and did a couple of factory tours, and understandably, since that time, the production of this case was delayed for reasons that surely nobody is aware of. But it's here now, and the release date currently is scheduled for October 12th. We'll see if Lian Li can stick to that. They've been moving their release dates a lot this year. If you're wondering, by the way, the O11 Mini is a case that we've got coming in. That's supposed to be arriving in November for purchase. So anyway, this case is pretty bare bones. It does have some addressable RGB LEDs, and it's got 3 stock fans. 2 of them are 200 millimeters. There is a caveat with these, which is that they're obstructed in the back, so not really 200 millimeters. The fans are, but the actual access to air going into the case is not fully 200 mil. But we're going to talk about that in the thermal section. Nearby competitors are plenty. There's the Cooler Master TD500 that we reviewed recently, performed pretty well in our testing. Be Quiet's 500DX is considerably more expensive, closer to the $100 mark, but is a very competitive airflow case if you can stretch the budget. And then there's also, closer to this one, the P400A in the $80 to $90 range when it's actually in stock, which appears to be pretty rare these days, although it has been out for a little while and it has been one of the most popular airflow cases. As sort of a joke, originally when Lian Li showed us this case, it was referring to it as a P400 or an H500 killer at the time. And the H500 series, plenty as they are, does include some kind of cheap ones, like the Cooler Master H500 Blank, as we call it. And that was a $100 case originally, but also 200 millimeter focus for the front. And whenever you're buying 200 mil fans, a lot of the time you're buying partly for looks, because you're not really planning to take these out for the most part and swap them for something else. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The fans are a lot of the look of these types of cases, and there's nowhere else you can put them. You're not gonna be able to relocate them. So this is part looks, but a lot thermals. Externally, things are pretty obvious, so there are a bunch of holes punched in the back of the case. Lian Li has been working on improving its thermals in every aspect of the cases lately, especially after our LandCool 2 original review. They seriously improved things with the mesh and were pretty in touch with us as they were working on those improvements, as they were sort of ramping their design iterations. This front panel is not the ultra-fine mesh in the same sense that we would talk about with the Cooler Master NR600, but it is fairly fine, and there's no dust filter behind it, which for airflow is a positive, because you don't want multiple layers of mesh, because you're going to end up with holes aligned with steel or whatever the mesh material might be made out of, and then you just end up with no airflow. So a positive for airflow, but keep in mind dust management may be a consideration. That said, with these lower static pressure 200 millimeter fans, if you have other stuff in the room that's pulling air, this might not be competing with it. So that is a potential upside of the fans. In terms of assembly quality, the front panel is actually pretty difficult to remove on this case. There are some clips on the inside that you can push and try to force through, but it's really on there. And when we were speaking with Lian Li, it sounds like this is going to change. So there are plans to get this fixed for the... I'm not exaggerating this. Jesus. There are plans to get this resolved for retail, but obviously we can't review a product we don't have. So the way it works right now is what you just saw. Not the worst in the world. We didn't have to Dremel the clips off like we did on our Noctis 450 years ago, but this is definitely the NZXT just yank card approach to removing a front panel. The upside is that at least they haven't tethered the panel to the case with cables, but that's not really impressive these days. All right, let's get to the build notes and the thermals and noise analysis by Patrick, then we'll talk conclusions. The front panel will rarely need to be removed at all, since the 200mm fans for intake can't be moved to any other location in the case. And it's unlikely that anyone would want to buy a Landcool 215 and then get rid of the 200mm fans that define it, just like the H500 from Cooler Master. These fans indirectly limit the radiator compatibility of the case as well. Radiators should be used with relatively high static pressure fans that correctly match their size. 200mm radiators are rare, and even the ones that do exist wouldn't fit in this case. And by the way, don't use these fans to cool a 120mm or 140mm wide radiator. Lian Li's product page shows another option, a 360mm radiator sandwiched between the two 200mm fans and three 120mm fans in a push-pull configuration. But the 200mm fans are redundant and add nothing but noise in this arrangement. Keep in mind the hub size alone, you're losing a ton of surface area on the radiator, so we don't recommend this. Nor do we recommend the tubes up radiator orientation that they used in that picture, but that's another story. That leaves the top of the case, which has space for two 140mm fans side by side or two 120mm fans, for a max of 280mm radiators supported. The rear exhaust slot only supports 120mm fans due to the narrow footprint of the case, but the rear fan can be adjusted up or down by 3 centimeters. The top of the case is 6 centimeters above the top edge of the motherboard, which is the effective limit for combined radiator and fan thickness. Lian Li's spec sheet claims a conservative 55mm here. 120mm wide radiators potentially have a little more wiggle room since they can be offset away from the board, resolving potential clearance issues with certain configurations. In Lian Li's advertising images, they also depicted a vertical GPU mount. There's no vertical mount included in the case, but like Fantex, Lian Li is selling it as an add-on kit that replaces the horizontal mounts. We're not especially fond of vertically mounting air-cooled GPUs, but we found this style of add-on mounting to be about as effective as possible since it keeps the GPU cooler intakes away from the side panel. And our recent tests with the 3080 Fe and 2080 Ti Strix vertically mounted in the P400A confirm that. We'd recommend against using shroud top fans with a vertically mounted air-cooled GPU, the way that they are in this picture, since they have limited access to cool air and will do very little to help or be effective. And in some designs, it'll just see the hot exhaust pushed right back into the GPU cooler anyway. We'll cover the efficacy of the intake fans in the thermal section later on, but the size of the fans is purely decorative. They may be 200mm in diameter, but they're mounted on the front of a chassis that was built for 120mm and 140mm fans. So easily a third of each fan surface is blocked by steel. They still work just fine, but make no mistake, the reason these are 200mm fans rather than 140mm, like the ones the Landcool 2 Mesh uses, is purely aesthetic, not functional, while 140mm fans would maintain better pressure. In contrast, the rear of the case is unusually well ventilated, with holes punched from the top edge of the case right down to the surface of the power supply shroud. Hopefully, this will allow a direct front-to-back airflow pattern without hot air pooling around the CPU cooler. But again, we'll test that in the thermal section. Other than the LED and reset buttons, there's an illuminated power button, 2 USB 3 ports, and a combined mic and headphone jack. It's absolutely minimal on the I/O front, but this is a budget case. Moving on to the panels. The two side panels share the same attachment method, with 2 captive thumb screws at the back and 2 stamped out steel lugs at the front that slide into the chassis. It's a simple system and it works well. The steel side panel is reinforced with thick rolled over edges, and the glass side panel is bordered with a foam strip on the top edge to cushion it and a steel strip at the bottom edge to protect it from chipping. There are only 2 minor problems we can see here. Users should avoid bowing out the steel side panel since it only attaches to the case at the front and rear edges, and the glass panel has no handle at all. We'd like to see a handle on the rear edge, like the one on the steel panel. That'd make it a bit easier to pull out. The screws on the 200mm fans were not particularly tight in this case, but the relatively fragile corners on the fans had almost buckled in the case when we received it. This seems more a fault of the fan design than whoever assembled the case. The fans still work normally, but users should be extra careful when removing or replacing them, and don't over-tighten it. Lian Li told us that the fan hub stickers on the final production cases will be smaller, but this is the only design change to the fans, and the fans mechanically in our review are the same as the retail versions. The hard drive bay is interesting as the next point, and near the limit of the least possible material used for its construction. It can still hold 2 3.5-inch drives, as is standard for mid-towers these days, but it's just a single bay that slots into the bottom of the case. One drive can be mounted inside, and one more on top. Installing drives requires screws, of course, so there's no fancy toolless sleds here, but slotting the bay itself into place underneath the shroud is toolless, which is a good thing since the full-length bottom filter prevents easy access to the bottom of the case. The bay can be mounted in two positions, forwards or backwards, to give more room to either the power supply or the front fans. As for the bottom of the case, the bottom filter is unusually large for a case that has a power supply shroud. It covers the entire floor of the case at approximately 40 by 16 centimeters. For the most part, that's a positive, but there are two problems with it that other cases have already solved. First, it's a rear eject filter, so taking it out for cleaning will require pulling the case out at least 40 centimeters away from whatever's behind it, probably a wall. Secondly, the rails for the filter are bulky and extend the full length of the case. They work well for their intended purpose, but they also form a skirt around the edge of the case that restricts airflow. The case legs are already stumpy at just under 2 centimeters, and the plastic rails cut that space in half, so there's less than a 1 centimeter gap for air at the bottom edges of the case. There's a reason this matters too. The power supply shroud is fully ventilated and has two 120mm fans on top, one of which is unusable because of the power supply, but still. The case floor is fully ventilated as well, and even the hard drive bay has perforations in its surface. The intent here was clearly to allow bottom intake, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. For any users who want to try installing fans on the surface of the power supply shroud, we'd recommend finding a way to boost the case legs. Lian Li's own LanCool 2 mesh takes a similar approach with fan mounts on top of the shroud, but it has both more room for airflow underneath the case and plenty of ventilation along the one side of the shroud. Clearance underneath the power supply shroud is inadequate. We use a run-of-the-mill 8.5 centimeter tall ATX power supply for case reviews, and in this case, the surface of the power supply was nearly flush with the shroud. That's not automatically a problem, but the case is narrow enough that there are cable cutouts which overlap with the power supply, and they're almost completely unusable. Fitting a fan cable through, for example, would require pulling the connector through before the power supply is installed. The clearance is that tight. The LanCool 215 does have the advantage over the P400A in that it can fit larger power supplies if needed, like even the 22 centimeter long EVGA 1600 T2s that we use for overclocking. But the longer the power supply, the fewer cable cutouts will be available. On the subject of fitting large components, the 215 can technically fit up to SSI EEB motherboards by virtue of having a flat motherboard tray and stock intake fans that are installed on the outside of the chassis rather than the inside. We wouldn't recommend installing any board larger than SSI CEB, that's 12 inches by 10.5, since boards wider than 10.5 inches will cover the cable cutouts at the front of the case, and there are few other options for routing cables at all. Lian Li helpfully lists support for eATX boards, quote, with a maximum width of 280 millimeters, which is exactly the right width to cover up all the cable cutouts without corresponding to any actual form factor. With a normal ATX board installed, we found the cutouts on both the front and top edges of the board to be generously sized. Cable management room behind the motherboard tray tops out at about 2.4 centimeters, but Lian Li has done a good job of ensuring that cables from the front I/O line up with the included Velcro straps. They aren't bolted into the case, but there are side-by-side loops for the straps built into the case along the front and top edges that make tying down cables very easy. Given the limited space behind the motherboard tray, there'll inevitably be some clutter underneath the power supply shroud. But the compact design of the hard drive bay means that it doesn't need to be completely removed to make room for cables. Given that Lian Li is working with another company,
they use the more safer one that we cannot, especially people like me, scratch or whatever not. So yes, in front of me I have the Ferrari SF90 Stradale. Now the SF90 is named after Scuderia Ferrari's 90th anniversary. It's the first ever Ferrari PHEV that they have. It's an internal combustion engine with 3 electric motors, 2 in the front and 1 behind. It's a 4.0 liter twin turbo V8. Now the V8 is similar to the Ferrari 488 Pista as well as the F8 Tributo, and this produces 1000 horsepower. It's 770 horsepower from the combustion engine with the remaining of 230 from the electric motors itself. Wow. I remember the first time I read about the Ferrari cars, I was like, wow, so powerful, wow, so fast. And here I am with the SF90 Stradale with 1,000 horsepower. That's crazy, okay? It goes 0 to 100 in 2.6 seconds, 0 to 200 in 6.7 seconds, and top speed at 340 kilometers per hour. Unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to drive it today, but let's go on a walk around. Let's go. Alright guys, let's start from the front. Now, as you can see, something that all of you pretty much know already, that's the S-Duct. Now, when I look at the S-Duct, as you can see,
doesn't mean your fuel tank is now smaller, right? It just means that your
Hi. I'm not sure if the footage will be visibly different, but I'm using a GoPro Hero 9. Thank you, Bing. This is Bing's birthday present to me. She bought me a GoPro Hero 9, so this is my first time using it. What I like now is that there is a front screen, so I can sort of know the framing. And no, I was driving all the way to Setia Alam to meet up with Pro Nano, talking about our Evo Club car wash thingy. Yes, Evo Club extended warranty to help those who warranty ended and but couldn't sell their cars yet and they're worried about their cars. We have Evo Club warranty, extended warranty, and then we have Evo Club insurance, which is to help those in times like this. You want to pay your insurance in a staggered manner based on your drive, then only you slowly pay instead of one lump sum. Evo Club insurance is doing that to help people. And then Evo Club car wash, which is to help you all expand into additional businesses. Very low starting costs. So I'm gonna have a finalized discussion with them, and picked up a Red Bull. I know it's sweet, it's unhealthy, but when I feel sleepy, I'll get myself a can of these. I've always done that. Everybody is like, ew, it tastes like cough syrup. Maybe that's why I like it. I don't know, man. I like the taste. Weird. And I like the fact that, I mean, compared to the Austria one, which is okay. For those who don't know, this is the original Red Bull. The one in F1 doing all the crazy stunts. That is the Austrian Red Bull. Alright? So that one has a lot of gas. I might take it when I go to the pub or the bar, you know, Red Bull vodka or something. Anyway, when I bought this, I spotted something, because the person that I'm gonna meet later on, he loves a car. Alright? He loves a car that not many car guys car guys would know, but the extreme hardcore car guys would like. Normal car guys who ooh and ah on RS6 or on Ferraris, you know, Nissan GTRs, all this, they might not be, you know, they might not like it. So I spotted this and I got it and I bought it for him. This is some rare stuff, right? A Datsun 240Z. Yep, Japan's first sports car, in a way. Japan's first volume production sports car. Okay, 240Z. And it was just there. I was like, oh, but it's not cheap though. 36 ringgit. Bah. And one of my covers of my previous magazines, I put the 240Z there. Anyway, it's just a short clip just to test out the quality. If I have anything else to say, I'll just continue on. If I don't, I don't. Cheers.
What?
I was
Holy
like,
shit.
I just went and buy Red Bull, and then yeah. So your favorite,
Oh my god.